You have legal questions. Amy the attorney has the answers. Welcome to today's show. And here's Amy.
Hello, and this is Amy the attorney. I am welcoming Aubrey Gann-Redmon. Is that correct?
Yep.
And she has had a business law firm in Kansas City for quite some time. She has focused primarily on probate in the early and middle parts of her, no, I shouldn't say early and middle parts, but she's now focusing on medical marijuana and has become a whiz kid about the ins and outs of licensing businesses who want to become dispensaries. I'm going to mispronounce that, so maybe you'll say it for me. And so welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to start, and I really want to start with what is the state of medical marijuana in Missouri? Today is June the 11th of 2019. I know it's a rolling ball, could change, but from what was passed in November, what is happening now?
So patient, caregiver, and business license applications went online a week ago on June 4th. The regulations, while people will refer to them as final, they're not final. They're emergency regulations, and there's going to be a public hearing on those next month in Jefferson City, which I'm hoping to make too. And essentially, the situation you have now is patients are currently going to their doctors or cannabis-friendly clinics to get their certifications and recommendations, because those have to be within 30 days old by the time you apply. And the soonest you can apply as a patient or a caregiver is going to be July 4th. Then on the business side, you've got business owners who are getting together their standard operating procedures, which I call SOPs. They're, getting their real estate locked down, trying to figure out where they're going to place their businesses because the licenses are going to be attached to the premises. And they're getting their documents from the Secretary of State, business organizations, stuff like that. So that's on the business licensing and application side. On the law and the regulatory side, we're still having a conversation with the department about what can be on the licensing application, what should be on the licensing application, and then maybe challenging some things that people are having a bit of an issue with. And so that dialogue is continuing. And the department emailed me this morning on an issue that I had addressed with them the other day and told me that they would get back with me next week. But right now they're updating their FAQs and trying to iron out some of these details as well. So
okay.
It's in flux.
Yeah, I'm so happy it happened. I love reading your Facebook post because you seem passionate about the issue, but also in a very holistic way, including talking about people that are currently imprisoned for marijuana and what the state should be doing to address those people. We're going to get to that, but I want to break some of this down of what you're talking about. So first, I want to talk about, you mentioned caregiver user. Is there a mechanism for somebody that cares, say, for somebody who couldn't be licensed? I mean, is there a differentiation of the caregiver and user?
Yes, sort of.
Okay.
So first you have your patient, right? And to be a qualified patient under Amendment 2, there's 10 different categories that you can get your certification under. Everything from autism and migraines and multiple sclerosis to the last category, which is anything your doctor thinks that it would be beneficial for. Realize that most doctors won't certify under that last category so early in the game because they're worried about getting audited. So they're just going to go with the easiest thing. So if you have a patient who is younger than 18 years old, or maybe is, well, let's just start there. their parent or guardian can be a caregiver for them. And so what you do is you turn in your patient application with your doctor certification that has to be less than 30 days old. And then the caregiver turns in their application to be your caregiver, which will allow them to purchase marijuana on your behalf, to transport it on your behalf, to administer it on your behalf, and if you pay an extra $100, to grow it in a locked facility on your behalf, and also to administer it to you. And that caregiver status works the same if you're an adult, disabled person, or even if I wanted to be a patient and I didn't want to grow my own, I could hire a caregiver to grow mine for me. And a caregiver can have up to 2 patients that they grow for, as well as being able to grow for themselves. So a caregiver can also be a patient. They just can't be so incapacitated that they don't understand what they're doing for someone else.
Okay. So this would be, that's a separate application, separate process for the caregiver persona or caregiver role in the business.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk about the user and the process. You said the applications begin July 4th.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they apply?
So they apply online through the Department of Health and Senior Services website. So if you Google Missouri DHSS medical marijuana, you can't miss it. It'll take you right there. On the top right-hand side of the webpage, they're going to have a drop-down menu where you could choose, for facilities, for patients, whatever. You're going to go to that patient button, and you're going to click it, and the application's right there. You can actually look at the application now and even print it off and fill it out so that when you go to apply online, you'll have all of your information already there. Things that patients need to realize that they need to have: number one, that doctor certification that's less than 30 days old. Number two, they need to have a $25 application fee ready to go, a copy of their driver's license or state-issued ID, and also something akin to a passport photo that is less than 3 months old. So they need to turn all of those things in and be able to apply that way. If they want to grow their own, there's a special section on the application where they have to explain to the department where they're planning on growing it and how they plan to maintain the security of that area so only the patient can have access to that area or their caregiver. Okay.
All right, let's backtrack. So online is going to be the only place that you can apply.
Correct. Unless online shuts down, then the department is going to notify people through their website of alternative means of application.
Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about the grow. You growing your own. You talked about it a little bit in the previous 2 segments, but I want to nail it down. What are the costs involved, and are they doing this in their basement? What is happening? What would give me the whole deal on growing your own?
So a patient can grow up to 6 flowering plants, I should say, at one time. You can have what they call teenage plants that are under 14 inches tall. You can have clones, but you can only have 6 actual flowering plants. For people who don't understand how grows work, flowering depends on deprivation of light. So in a controlled environment for an indoor grow, most of the time when you're getting the plants started early on, in the clone stage or even the teenage stage, they might get 18 to 24 hours of light a day. But then when you want them to start flowering, you back that off to 12 and 12. And so they get 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark, they start flowering. So at that point, the patient can add an extra $100 to their application to apply for a home grow. You know what? If you've got a closet at home, you can actually grow in your closet as long as you're able to lock it and no one else is going to be able to get into it. But you just basically have to have a secure location, whether it's in your basement, whether it's a closet, whether it's a spare bedroom. I even have some clients that are talking about basically creating a facility where there's different rooms or different pods that they can lease to patients and caregivers to grow their own. So that's also going to be an option. If you want to do an outdoor grow, there has to be a screen over the top so you cannot access it from the top. There has to be slats so that you can't necessarily see what's in there. And of course, it has to be locked. So it's not like you're trying to keep the squirrels out of your garden. You're trying to keep everyone out of your garden. And I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to control your growing conditions in that kind of an environment. But Missouri is one of 3 states in the country with some of the best soil for cannabis cultivation. The other is Oregon and I believe North or South Carolina. So, we do have good growing conditions here, but for the patient, the cost is going to be lower to grow outside potentially because you're not going to have the electricity suck that you're going to have with the lighting situation that I just told you about. But the other issue is that you may not be able to have as consistent of a supply depending on what your needs are. And we can get into quantities if you want, but at the end of the day, the only way that you're really going to be able to, as a patient, the standard is 4 ounces of dried flower per 30-day period or its equivalent. And don't ask me for the equivalent off the top of my head because I'm really bad at math. And you're not going to be allowed to use combustible extraction methods in your home. So if you do want an extract, my best advice to patients is just once it becomes available, go to a dispensary and buy your dabs.
Okay.
Don't try to make them at home.
So under the new law, it's not just the smokable marijuana that we're talking about. It is all the different products. I've been to Colorado, so I've seen what's available. Are all the things, like you said, dab, oils, I can't even remember some of them. Are all of those going to be legal in the state of Missouri as well if you have a card?
Yep. And we, in the last legislative session, they were trying to put in place a ban that would have prevented edibles that would have appealed to children. Can't be shaped like a fruit. Can't, have a cartoon character on it. Can't, be sweet or whatever. That went nowhere, thank God. But, you should be able to find it. And they even allow suppositories in Missouri, which a lot of people are like, oh, who cares about that? Well, actually, somebody who is in a horrific amount of pain does care about that because that is probably the most effective delivery method. It enters the system rather quickly. It lasts for a very long time, and you can take very high doses that way without the corresponding head high or whatever you would normally get if you were to ingest that amount, like through an edible or whatever. And the reason that's important is a lot of states don't have suppositories. They're very, very difficult to find. So our law specifically allows for it, which is great.
Okay, let's talk about when you have the card and where you can, and we're going to specifically talk about smoking just because it's probably the most obtrusive and most noticeable. What is the law regarding where can you smoke that legal marijuana?
Not in a public place. So basically, you'll be safe in your home. Theoretically, and practically speaking, you shouldn't be doing it around other people in Missouri who aren't patients, because then you don't, if the smell attracts law enforcement or whatever, and you're the one smoking it, they're going to assume everyone else is partaking, and then you're going to have a bit of explaining to do. So typically in the privacy of your own home is the way to go. However, some locations may be able to provide a spot for a patient and either a family member or a caregiver, if they want to have them with them, to consume their cannabis medicinally on premises. It'll be like a little room. You gotta go in there by yourself and get the job done. But the trend nationally is towards consumption lounges. So I've got a client in Southern California who opened up the first legal consumption lounge down there. And it's just like a bar, except no alcohol, cannabis instead, and lots of water and snacks. So that's on the horizon. And I've been telling my dispensary clients, if you're smart, you're going to get a premises where you have extra space, so that when that does become a possibility, you can easily retrofit your space. And then you don't have to apply for a whole new license. You've already got a license on the premises.
Let's talk about the business side of this, which is where you're representing probably the most amount of people. What are the different kind of businesses associated with the medical marijuana industry? I mean, there's dispensaries, but I'm sure that there are other kinds of, start with the dispensaries, but there's probably other kinds of businesses that are associated with this industry.
So I'm just going to go down the food chain. So first you got to have a cultivator, which is your classic pot farmer, okay? And it's either going to be an indoor grow, an outdoor grow, or a greenhouse, which is kind of considered a combination of the two. To get it from the cultivator to the next stop, you're going to have a transport company. So transport companies are going to take the raw flower plant material to the testing facility. Testing facility is going to test the product, tell you how much THC, CBD, CBGN, whatever is in that product. They're going to make sure that there's no pesticides, solvents, things like that in it, that it's not contaminated. From there, the product can be taken to a manufacturing facility. So it's a manufacturer of infused products. I call them MIPS. But basically, they're the ones that make your gummies. They make the oils, shatter dabs, vape pen cartridges, all of that stuff. They may take that back to the testing lab to make sure that the solvents are completely out of it that they use for the extraction process. Then you're going to take it to a dispensary, and the dispensary is where you're going to ultimately be able to purchase these items. The dispensary, the MIP, the testing lab, the cultivator, they all use a seed-to-sale tracking system. Seed-to-sale tracking gets implemented for everybody December 2020. The reason for that is, how are we going to get the original plants and seeds here when it's illegal to transport across state lines? So we refer to that as immaculate conception. So there's an immaculate conception period in the state of Missouri for 1 year. And so January 1st, 2021, that's when you're going to start seeing, that you can only then, if you're trying to buy seeds or clones, you'll only be able to buy them from dispensaries or a licensed business. So, they're not going to, don't ask, don't tell how it got here before then.
Okay.
Policy.
That's surprising.
Yeah. Well, how else is it going to get started? So, but when you go to these trade shows, every possible industry that you can think of is in the cannabis industry. You've got to have HVAC people to get the exhaust just right. You've got to have soil guys who do nothing but produce soil for this. I saw a dry ice guy show up at the last conference I went to in Vegas. He looked like he had been just dropped there out of a helicopter. He had no idea why he was there. And I said, "What is the dry ice machine about?" And he goes, "I have no idea. There's a manufacturer down there. He can tell you." Well, I went and asked him. And what they do is they take the flour and they put it on a screen. And they put dry ice on top of it. And all the keef, which is the pollen and the trichomes and everything, falls through the screen onto a metal plate because of the dry ice. And that's what they make really, really highly concentrated concentrates out of. So, every single industry will be affected by this. Every single area of law will be affected by this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We are going to get to the criminal part of it, but I have a couple questions. The testing facility, is homegrown exempt from having to go through the testing facility?
Yeah, that's correct. It's very expensive to get your cannabis tested, number one. Most home growers probably aren't going to want that expense, although if they wanted to, they could. But number three, interesting factoid for the criminal defense folks out there, there is not a single lab that is DEA certified in this country to test for THC levels.
Okay.
Because it's a Schedule I controlled substance under the CSA. So no level is an acceptable level.
Right. All right. Okay.
But that only becomes important when you talk about CBD and hemp, and because basically they've deschedulized THC derived from hemp, but not any other form of THC.
And is that, I mean, and this is just kind of from left field, is that just policy? Because, I mean, like, what is keeping the United States government from making it not a Schedule I substance? I mean, what is happening?
Politics.
But what is the politics?
The politics is basically that there's a certain segment of the population that still buys into the fake news of reefer madness and still thinks it's going to kill brain cells and cause people to be stupid and unproductive and whatever the case may be. And it's just a matter of getting out there, correcting the history, correcting the narrative on this, and moving forward with science, and we'll talk about that when we get to criminal and DUI and stuff, but there's not a single study out there that will link THC to impaired driving. And also, they have not been able to do a single study that verifies that a person can physically overdose from this stuff. It's impossible. So while there may be cannabis-related deaths, like there is drunk driving-related deaths or drinking-related deaths, like somebody gets wasted and falls into a pool and drowns. I'm sure that's happened with cannabis.
Right.
But cannabis does not directly cause death in and of itself,
right,
like alcohol can or anything else can.
Is delivery going to be part of the mechanism here in Missouri? Could you deliver marijuana to somebody?
Absolutely. So if you get a cultivation license, a MIP license, a dispensary license, it includes your ability to transport. So every facility license is going to have different transport requirements. So a cultivation facility can transport to another licensed facility, whether it's a testing facility or a MIP. A MIP can transfer to testing to a dispensary, and a dispensary can deliver to its patients and caregivers.
That's wonderful. I mean,
yeah, because if the whole point is patient access, and you're dealing with severely disabled people who may not be able to drive or may not have reliable access to transportation, then absolutely. The only thing is, before it leaves the dispensary, it has to be paid for. So they may have to take the payment over the phone or something to that effect, but they're not going to allow the product to leave the dispensary until it's paid for.
Okay. On these businesses that are the businesses that you're helping shepherd through this process, what are the costs associated for them?
Oh, that is such a loaded question. So it's it's going to really depend on their business model. So some of my clients are what's called vertically integrated. And what that means is they're getting a license not just for a dispensary, but also a MIP and a cultivation as well. So they can do all three things. So it's going to be very expensive for them because they're going to have three separate applications, potentially three separate locations. And so, they're going to have a lot more costs. If you're just doing like 1,000 square foot dispensary, your costs are going to be much lower. Part of the issue that I raised with the Department of Senior Services, Health and Senior Services, was they had implemented capital requirements in their licensing structure. It was $500,000 liquid capital for cultivators and $300,000 apiece for MIPS and dispensaries. It got reduced to $300,000 on cultivation and $150,000 for MIPS and dispensaries. But think about that in an industry that doesn't have any banking whatsoever. You can't get a traditional bank loan. You can't even locate your business on a property that has a bank mortgage on it. Where are you going to come up with $150,000 liquid capital to show these folks? And that's, a significant amount of points on your license application. So I did make an argument that I thought that violated equal protection because of the disparate impact that has on urban communities and people of color, who I think belong in this industry, but are going to struggle even more with access to capital than the average person. So the costs are considerable. The other thing is, if you have a dispensary, or depending on the type of business model that you have, they're requiring you to have a pharmacist on call or on retainer, which is crazy to me because the pharmacists have never been able to prescribe this, and I'm not really sure what kind of education they get on it other than just cursory education, because less than 10% of our medical schools even get into the endocannabinoid system with their residents and their students. So, but it's an extra expense that you're just going to have in order to apply. And clients will sit there and say, well, I'll just put it on my application and then I won't do it. Well, no, you can't do that because your application's signed under oath. And if you have a significant deviation from that after you've been awarded your license can get yanked if you don't notify the department after the fact that things have changed. So whatever your plan is now, you need to kind of stick to it.
What is the money that the state has allotted for enforcement, both in the business sector and in the user sector or home grow sector? What are the enforcement mechanisms, and is there money and people for it?
I don't know how to answer that question. It's a very good question. So all the money that they have taken for prepayment of application fees, it totals almost $3.5 million at this point. That money is earmarked for veterans programs. So also in the legislature last year, something that didn't make it was they were trying to say, well, if there's lawsuits or whatever involving this law and its enforcement against the department, we want them to be able to utilize the Veterans Fund to pay for legal defense, which I found kind of egregious, and I think it's unconstitutional under A2, but that's just my opinion. That didn't survive, luckily. So the money issue, I'm not really sure about, to be quite frank. I don't know where it's going to come from, if they're going to use it out of the Veterans Fund or if they have a certain portion of that they're going to earmark. I do know that there's going to be 7 enforcement officers for the entire state of Missouri. So,
not a lot.
No, you're going to have 192 dispensaries, 60 grow facilities, and about 82 MIPS. So I'm guessing that the emphasis is going to be on enforcing business, as it has been in other states that have done this, rather than attacking the patients and the caregivers, unless there's some sort of report of abuse or law enforcement involvement.
Okay. What about actual smaller municipalities, cities, counties, and their reaction to this? I happen to be on the Grandview website for Grandview Municipal Court, and there was a notice of a meeting, a general public meeting of their city council to discuss the new marijuana regulations and how it would affect Grandview. Can you speak to that at all?
Not Grandview specifically. All I know about Grandview is they're going to have a hard time placing dispensaries or any businesses there, because unless they implement a variance through their ordinances, the law basically says that they have to locate these kinds of businesses 1,000 feet away from any church, secondary school, primary school, or daycare. And Grandview's got a lot of churches. So it's going to be very difficult to find a spot in Grandview unless they shorten that distance. And some cities have. Some cities in Missouri absolutely have. Columbia, for example, and I should say, the law doesn't allow any municipality in this state to prohibit a cannabis-based business.
Okay.
What it does say is that the city can regulate reasonable time, place, and manner, right? And of course, you can't have a big pot leaf out front or anything like that. Advertising is going to be very strict. That's why when you go to Colorado, you see all these adopt a highway signs with the cannabis businesses on them, because that's how they get to advertise on signs. So there's going to be restrictions like that. Like in Columbia, they tried to say, well, in our downtown district, you can only put them on the second floor of a building, and that failed. And so there have been lots of little skirmishes in the city council meetings as to how this is going to work. But most of the time, the trend is to say, okay, we're going to be welcoming because they realize it's going to bring revenue. But at the same time, they can't charge any additional tax on the marijuana, and they can only do reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And there's a meeting coming up in Kansas City, I believe, on the 12th. So maybe tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow.
Yeah. Will there be areas in the state of Missouri that it will be harder to get medical marijuana than, say, the cities? I mean, will there be a dearth of dispensaries and businesses in outstate or mid-Missouri?
Well, I think part of the problem that you're facing is, and you can see it in some of the application requirements, right? So with the merit-based scoring system, if you locate your business in an area that has a lower employment rate, you're going to get extra points on your license. And so there are people that are actively looking in congressional districts, in zip codes that are economically distressed, because they could potentially bring jobs to those areas. However, is it economically viable for a business to locate in an area like that? And we're not really sure. I mean, if the income's lower there, then they're not going to be able to mark up their product like they're used to. Like, there's about a 300% markup on average nationally, just because if you're a dispensary, you don't get the tax deductions under 280E that a normal business does. So your write-offs are less and your markup is higher, but in an economically distressed area, that may be a problem.
You mentioned tax, and then obviously licensing. What are some other cross sections of the law that are going to intersect with the medical marijuana in Missouri?
banking. So Triad Bank is the only bank has said that it's going to assist these types of clients, and the fees are probably going to be pretty high. There is a banking bill currently pending in the United States Congress that might change all of this. They hope to get it passed by the end of the year, but we'll see. Child custody in divorce cases. It's no longer an illegal drug. If a parent is medicating with cannabis, that's not going to be grounds to be an unfit parent. Probate and trust law, which is kind of my baby in the background that I come from, my big concern is with patient and caregiver home grows, because there's just a tiny little blurb at the end of the regs that basically say, okay, you've got 10 days to notify the department if somebody dies. Then we're going to give you a letter that allows you to transport their cannabis, whether it's plant cannabis or whether it's purchased cannabis, to a local dispensary for disposal. Well, number one, who's going to pay the dispensary to dispose of it? Because disposal is kind of expensive sometimes. Depending on whether or not it's a hazardous material, and they won't know whether it's a hazardous material because they won't have it tested. So they don't know what's been put on it, in other words. Number two, in probate, we have to inventory every single asset. So are you telling me that the cannabis is not an asset, doesn't have a value that creditors can come after to get their debts paid, and it's not available to the heirs? I mean, so there's a lot of issues there. Or if somebody who owns one of these businesses dies, is their license transferable? How does that work? When it comes to DUI laws, you know, I believe it was the Highway Patrol, at any rate, some state level of law enforcement up in Michigan commissioned a test to get done to try to see if they could figure out what a legal limit would be for drivers. And the test said there's no way to determine a legal limit for this. So they recommended none. Employment is another big one. A lot of states are doing away with employment discrimination against cannabis users. And some states are saying, no, you can't test for this anymore. Work comp in Missouri, our work comp statutes basically will only deny benefits if you are found to be under the influence at the time of the accident. So that's not going to cover somebody who just, you know, went home the night before, had some before bed, woke up fine the next day, and was injured on the job. So, I mean, insurance coverage. Is insurance going to start to cover this? You know, what are we going to do under the Affordable Care Act? So, I mean, it's like, it will literally affect everything.
Yeah, I am just loving talking to you because I just know you're passionate about the issue, and you're just giving us the whole view of it. And it is going to impact us. And even, you know, for people that wouldn't think, oh, it's not going to impact me, man, it is going to be in your life in one way or another. And you may not even know it until something pops up.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about criminal enforcement of marijuana laws. I had read on your blog that, you know, Jean Peters Baker, who is the prosecutor in Jackson County, pretty much after the Amendment 2 passed, then said we are going to pretty much stop enforcing it with some exceptions. She didn't say everything, but that we will no longer prosecute marijuana cases.
Correct.
Is that a trend that you've seen across the state?
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
So we've got that now in St. Louis and in Kansas City. And it's, I believe it's 100 grams or less. You would probably know better than me. I had a gentleman call me about a month ago. He was flying in from Denver. He was an amputee, so he's missing a leg. And he had 2 cartridges in his backpack, vape cartridges. He went outside to smoke a cigarette to wait to get picked up. His friend was inside to claim the bags, and they saw a K-9 unit tag his bag at bag claim. And of course, you know, it was a situation of, am I in trouble? And I said, well, KCPD has jurisdiction over the airport, so you're probably just going to get a citation. Nothing ended up coming from it, to be honest with you. And I was very happy about that. But yeah, that seems to be the trend. And there is a growing trend towards decriminalization of numerous types of drugs, psilocybin and peyote most recently in Denver and Oakland, respectively. And I know that there's a groundswell for that here, too. I mean, most people are like, oh, hold on, we just legalized marijuana here. I mean, but what's happening is, as the trend grows towards what some people refer to as recreational use, I'll call it adult or therapeutic use, there's also a trend towards just decriminalization of other substances in general, too, just because everyone's starting to realize that criminalization has been based primarily on politics, not on science. And so I think you're going to see more of it, and I wouldn't be surprised if we had full adult use here in Missouri in the next 2 to 3 years. And, maybe also psilocybin or magic mushrooms would follow that, just because of its therapeutic use on PTSD and severe depression when nothing else works.
How has the legislature address at all people that are incarcerated for marijuana at this time while they were, I know Amendment 2 passed, they are doing some law. So anybody in Jeff City talking about the people that are incarcerated right now?
Yeah, there was a rep out of St. Louis. I would say his name, but I'm going to butcher it. So I'm just going to say a rep out of St. Louis. And there have been a couple other reps too that have put forward expungement bills that just didn't really make it anywhere. And that's super disappointing, because when you think about it, these are people that are incarcerated for doing something that is now pretty much legal in a majority of the states across the country. And there are people like Augie Bush who are making millions, if not billions, off of this industry, while others are being locked up for the exact same thing. I find it morally abhorrent. That being said, in California and in Colorado and in other states, they're really starting to push that decriminalization and the expungements and all of that. And I think that it should have been the first step. And then, businesses should have been the second step. But no one listens to me. So
Right. Well,
what do I know?
It's money.
Yeah,
it's a money deal.
Right. You're absolutely right.
That's it. So let me ask you this. Okay, I keep saying that. Let me ask you this. I do that every time. What about the doctors? Like, I know that there are specific clinics in Kansas City that are going to start seeing patients to get the license. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be the trend? Or I will say, I asked my doctor in January after it had passed, and she was like, I don't feel comfortable doing it. I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she has changed her mind, but will be the trend be a specific doctor that pretty much sees the patients that need this? Or do you feel like it will expand to general practitioners, somebody's doctor?
I'm not sure how to answer that question either, because right now, the trend is to have places like the green clinics, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Excellent organization, or business company, whatever you want to call it, franchise. They are incredible. And what happens is, you take your medical records from your treating physician who has already diagnosed you, and you go to a doctor that understands cannabis, is knowledgeable about it, is not afraid of it, won't fearmonger it, won't make you feel like a criminal for going in there. They review your medical records. They give you an evaluation based on those medical records and say, yeah, I can check the box for migraines. So a couple things about that. Thing number one is you can get a medical card from another state. For instance, California doesn't have a residency requirement. And say you have a medical card from California, you're in Missouri, and you have less than your 4 allotted ounces on you, you're immune from prosecution, period. But you're not going to be able to probably buy it in a dispensary, which is another odd constitutional argument where you're given an immunity from prosecution, but not the privilege of buying it. So does full faith and credit really exist? Medical tourism has become big in the states that do allow reciprocity, like Nevada. But then, you've got this other issue too of, will these doctors start to come online? And part of that is actually a cost issue for them. I saw one doctor in one of the groups that I belong to and get my information from. Her insurance premiums went up $1,000 a month just for recommending medical cannabis. Do they go up $1,000 a month for recommending fentanyl? I mean, I don't know, but it might be an economic thing for some of these doctors. I think, again, it goes back to the education thing. If we can get out there and start educating people and getting rid of the fake news that was done by Reefer Madness, then maybe, we'll see these insurance rates drop. It becomes more economically feasible for these doctors to do this. Also, as lawyers, Amendment 2 protects professionals. It protects CPAs, it protects, lawyers, it protects doctors from, working legally in this industry on a state level. But one thing that hasn't happened yet is that our Office of Chief Disciplinary Counsel has not yet come out like they have in Colorado and said, if you're a lawyer and you're a patient, we'll protect you. They haven't done that yet. And so, there's some of us that are eagerly waiting for that decision and wondering if our ethics counsel is even going to touch it at all. So, and I think there's probably something going on with doctors in that realm too. There's a lot of fear for professionals.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, so what have I not asked you that you think people are wanting to know or should know about?
Often I get asked, and I'll just kind of go through the typical questions I get asked on a regular basis.
Great.
How much money do I need to open up a dispensary? You're probably going to need about $500,000 to get a dispensary up and running, and that's going to be hard to come by until you get your license. And once you get your license, then you're going to get a bunch of investors. You have to be 51% Missouri owned in order to get a business license. You have to be a Missouri resident with proof of residency in order to get a patient card here and be allowed to grow your own. If you're a caregiver, you can have 2 people, including and plus yourself, so 3 that you can grow for. And then, of course,
Aubrey, I'm going to stop you. Can the caregiver sell that marijuana to the other 2 people? You're just growing it for them.
They're growing it for them.
Okay.
Now, it's not a situation where sale of the product is allowed. Sale of the service is a gray area. So there's that.
Okay.
So, I mean,
we're in it depend land. It depends.
Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing too. I mean, you go to these conferences and you can talk to people who have been in this industry for 10 years in another state, and you'll ask them questions and their answer is, we're not really sure what's happening. We don't really know what's going on. So, I mean, it's kind of the Wild West. We're just sort of muddling our way through it the best we can. And, I should say that the state is doing a really good job implementing this. I mean, there have been other states that have had nightmare situations like Arkansas. God, when did they pass their law? 4 years ago? And they only have 3 dispensaries in the entire state. So, I mean, I know everyone's impatient, but, for all of their faults, the department's doing a very good job trying to implement this on the timeline that they were given. And we do need to be grateful for that. But like with any other law, it's imperfect. And if there are questions or comments that people have, they need to let the department know. They're actually fairly responsive. But there's lots of constitutional issues here. And one of those issues that I pointed out the other day to the department was they want people to, on their application, describe how they're going to handle financial transactions when there's no bank involved. That violates the federal money laundering statute, right? So you're asking people to put down in writing in 1,000 words or less how they plan on handling financial transactions that are illegal under federal law, and then they sign that form under oath. That's a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So, there's so many areas here that just have to be parsed out, and it would just be made infinitely easier if you just deschedule it all. And I know we're here to talk about cannabis, but I get asked a lot about the CBD situation.
Okay, great.
And the issue with that is also nobody knows, but they had the Farm Bill in 2018, which descheduled hemp derived THC. So essentially what that means is someone could grow acres and acres of hemp, take it to a lab, have all the THC extracted out, and theoretically that THC is not a Schedule I controlled substance and is legal. Whereas you could grow a pot plant and that is illegal. So, there's some interesting stuff there, and I call it quasi-legal because there have been raids on CBD facilities where they are pulling all of the edibles off the shelf. And that's because the FDA has yet to come in and say whether or not it's a safe food additive and put regs in place for that. And then also, the USDA is going to be granting licenses to hemp farmers through local, state, and educational programs. So theoretically, if you don't have a license to grow hemp, that would also be illegal, even though it's been descheduled. So, even CBD is in flux right now.
Explain to me CBD and THC.
Okay. So you have do you want a chart? I can show you a chart.
Sure.
Okay. So essentially you have a plant that has a ton of medicinal properties and a lot of different medicinal compounds, but they're all different. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to isolate certain compounds. And really, people who tend to be advocates of this plant want a full spectrum. So what you have here, can you see that?
Yep.
So basically, these are all the different cannabinoids you have in the plant. And every single one of them has a different medical use.
Okay.
And so, for instance, if you have CBD, it says here that it reduces spasms, anxiety, it's a sleep aid, muscle relaxant, antidepressant, increases appetite, pain relief, reduces nausea, inhibits tumor cell growth, and is anti-inflammatory. THC, on the other hand, is a pain reliever, increases appetite, relieves spasms, antioxidant, muscle relaxant, and relieves nausea. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different compounds in the plant. And we only really talk about 2 of them, which is CBD and THC. And THC is the psychoactive component of the plant.
So CBD it doesn't necessarily get you high like THC does. Right.
No, in fact, if you were to vape it or eat it or whatever, you're not going to feel stoned. You're not going to feel high. You might feel less pain, you might feel less anxious, but it's not going to be the pronounced, oh yeah, I'm going to sit back here and relax.
Right.
You're just going to go about your life like you took a leave is what's going to happen.
Did the Department of Health and Human Services create a entire division, or is it just under the general auspices of Department of Health and Human Services?
They created a special division. And I don't know if they call it a division, but they have, all different kinds of divisions within them. For instance, they're the same entity or the same body that regulates MoHealthNet, which is our Medicaid program. They also put out regulations for nursing homes. They do all kinds of things.
Right.
So, it's a subsection of that department.
And if you said to get a hold of them, would it just be the same thing that you mentioned at the top of Google, Department of Health and Human Services, marijuana, and it'll get you to a place where you can ask them questions?
Absolutely. And they have an email, and they also have a phone number that you can contact them at to comment or ask questions.
Okay, and we'll get those on the screen during the edit. I am so happy you came on. This is a subject that has always interested me. I'm so glad it finally passed in Missouri. And I hope that we do, you say 2 or 3 years down the road, that it's legal for everyone. And I want to work with you or anyone that wants to work on expungement and exoneration of people that are still incarcerated because of marijuana. It's ridiculous. I've been doing criminal defense since 2002, and I'm always just stunned at the lack of knowledge around marijuana and by prosecutors and their somewhat or their zeal about prosecuting this what I consider to be somewhat harmless drug. And I'm ready to see that change, and I'm happy it's changing in my lifetime. I feel like there's a lot of stuff in the criminal justice world that is changing. The pendulum is swinging, and I'm just ecstatic to be seeing it and being a part of it, because it's a long time coming and has so much to do with race and class and money, and it's time for some justice. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.